Hi, my name's Catherine Hamilton. I am the owner of Crumb Hugs based in Victoria, Australia. I sell decorated sugar cookies for parties and events. I also design and make my own stamps and cookie cutters, which are available to purchase via my Etsy store. There's been a fair bit of interest in my decorating tutorials over on Instagram recently, so I thought I would do a really in-depth tutorial for anyone that would like some more tips and tricks. So today I'm going to show you how to use a layered stamp using this adorable little fairy. Like and subscribe if you'd like to see more of these longer, detailed videos. Otherwise, let's get started. So I've lightly dusted the stamp with some corn flour, and I'm just going to start pressing in my fondant. If you use gloves, you might like to just scrape out with your fingers. I also use a little stamp to scrape out sometimes as well, just something that's quite broad and flat works really well. You can buy special tools. And then I press in just to make sure it's pushed up against the edges. If you're going to use gloves, the best ones to choose are vinyl or nitrile, just because it doesn't stick to the fondant as much. Or you can just use no gloves at all, which works perfectly fine. So with a layered stamp, what you want to do is put the colours in order of which they appear towards the front of your cookie. So the parts of the fairy that stick out the furthest will be bits that will fill in with fondant first. I like to just make sure that there's not any bits squelching over the sides, otherwise you do tend to get bleed into your other colours and it just doesn't look as neat. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just using this little tool which I bought from Amazon just to make sure that it's all neatly tucked in. You can use a little bit of fondant to lift off any pieces that have come away as well. So I've done her arms and her head, but her legs are actually sitting further back than her dress. Her dress will go over the top of her legs, so I'm going to do the pink of her dress before I do her legs. Again, just carefully pushing it in with this little tool rather than scraping, just so it doesn't bleed into the other colours. There's a little piece which is her neck, which sits up a little bit further um, than the dress in the stamp. So I'm just going to leave that bit and put some flesh coloured fondant over it a little bit later. These super detailed stamps are a labour of love. When I do a full set, I try not to have every single stamp be quite so detailed because they are time consuming, but they are worth it because they look really cute and it is really a work of art. Okay, so now I'm going to put in the rest of the flesh coloured pieces that are around her dress, but that sort of sit behind her dress, so the little gap between her chin and her dress and her legs. Again, just scraping out so that it's nice and flush with the edges of the stamp. If you have a little bit too much fondant in there, you will find what happens is that it squelches out around the sides and it just doesn't look as neat. So I'm just making sure that there's not a part in the middle that's too low. So I'm just adding a little bit more fondant to the middle there just so there's not a dip which will create a sort of divot crater when you stamp it out on your background fondant. So next I'm going to do the little flower. Some people like to two-tone everything, so they might like to two-tone the center of the flower with some yellow fondant. I personally think that with little tiny details like that, it's better off just getting a small paintbrush and some edible paint and just painting those on. So I'm just pressing straight on top of the flower. So now I've done the flower, so I can put her hair color in. So this is why this is called a layered stamp, because the flower portion is one layer above the hair portion in the stamp, which means it will sit further forward when it actually gets stamped out. Everything's sort of back to front or mirrored, I suppose, when it actually gets flipped and turned out on the fondant. Just making sure that the edges are nice and firm up to the edges of the stamp, that it's not too full so it's not going to sculpture over the sides, and that there's not too much bleeding into the other colours as well, just to make sure that we don't accidentally end up with uneven edges. Here I'm using a little scraper, so I don't think I mentioned before, this is just a stamp that I use because it's nice flat surface, but you can buy special tools for this just to help scrape away the edges a little bit. Next, I'm just going to do her little wings. So pressing in straight over the top, getting into all the little nooks. Here, I'll use my scraper just to scrape out the excess. You want to avoid scraping too hard over the top of your other colors, because what can happen is that you actually pull your other colors into that portion that you've just put the color into. So if you can avoid pulling over the top of all your fondant when you're scraping, that will help avoid bleed. Just making sure that the edge of the stamp doesn't have any little bits of leftover fondant on it, so picking up those bits with a separate piece of fondant just to make sure it's nice and neat and clean. Now we've filled all our colours, we can put our background fondant down. So I'm just using white, so just make sure it's nice and smooth and there's no air bubbles in there. And press down. So you want to press down very firmly, but not so hard as to make things squelch over the edge. So I like to use this little rolling pin as a nice firm surface to spread out the distribution of weight evenly to make sure I get everything stuck onto the background fondant. A flat based glass might work really well to do that as well. So now's the moment of truth. Pop off the stamp, and there we have our beautiful little fairy who's ready to be cut out. So now just trim off all that excess background fondant, so we've just got the small border of white around the edge. And now we can put it onto our cookie. So I just use a food safe brush and water to adhere to the cookie. Just get it lined up as neatly as possible. And there is usually little rough bits around the edge, so I just take the same brush with just a little bit of water and just touch up around all the edges to make sure that there's none of those little flyaway bits of fondant sticking out. Okay, so there's the base. Now we can start doing the fun bits, which is the decoration. So I just use an edible brush and edible paints. I would definitely recommend, if you're going to make cookies a lot, to get some edible paints and just buy the prime colors and white, and just mix your own colors rather than buying hundreds of pre-mixed edible colors. You can usually make up pretty nice colors yourself. I always like to just add a little bit of blush. I think that's really cute. And using just a black edible pen to do her eyelashes or her eyes. Do you find that a black edible pen is a really good thing to have in your little tool drawer? I use it quite a lot for characters. Now I'm just going to add a little bit of edible glitter to her wings. I didn't bother to put any glue or any water down for this, I just tap it on. And there we have it. One finished little baby fairy. Very cute. And here is the final set. So I had some other fairy themed cookies as well.